Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting with George Galloway and the Workers' Party of Britain, and tonight's meeting on China and where we stand. So, George, if you're ready there.
I'm ready, Rob, and thank you very much for assembling this fine attendance on this extremely summer evening. I'm grateful to all the comrades of the Workers' Party and also the wider public who will be watching on the other platforms. This is a timely subject, although Russia would probably have been an even more timely one. The facts are that Russia and China are the two big diversions from Britain's extremely serious political and economic problems. And just like the Russian diversion, the Chinese one is virtually fat-free. It is fact-free. It is evidence-free, but it's nonetheless a diversion of enormous proportions, and actually an even more dangerous one than the Russian diversion. Now, it's not that we, or certainly I, am an unalloyed lover of China. I'm not. As a matter of fact, I never was. Others in the leadership of the Workers' Party are far, far closer to China, certainly historically, than me. I didn't love China when it was communist, and I don't love it now that it's a hybrid of socialism and capitalism. There are more billionaires in China than in any other country in the world except the United States. Their economic system, political system, is not one that I myself would choose. But we stand with China in this confrontation, with Donald Trump and with Boris Johnson acting as his auxiliary. For many reasons, we stand with China. We stand with China because of Britain's own national interest, which is not being served by making an enemy of 1.4 billion people in the world. It's not in Britain's national interest to effectively, as we have now done, lost the Chinese market as a potential growth area of enormous proportions. Now that we have left the single market and left the European Union, which was hitherto our biggest export market, it does not make any sense at all to systematically and at the same time and in the same year burn your bridges to the European Union and your bridges to China and your bridges to Russia. That makes Napoleon look like a strategic genius. So we stand with China in this confrontation because we don't believe that it will be in the interests of British working people, of the British economy, and therefore ultimately the British state, to have provoked, at the very least, a trade war with China of extremely significant proportions. But we have geostrategic reasons why we stand with China in this standoff with Donald Trump and his auxiliaries also. And the geostrategic reason is this. I read someone the other day say that the real origin of this is that China is the new elephant in the room, and the other elephants that were already in the room don't like the interloping elephant. And I'm sure that that is a significant reason for this confrontation. From our point of view, we want as many elephants as possible. We don't believe in one elephant, especially a rogue bull elephant like Donald Trump, unleashed in the if you'll forgive the pun, in the China shop, trashing underfoot every international agreement that has been made, and thundering around, picking fights all over the world, with Iran, with Venezuela, with Russia, with China, in the Ukraine, in the Baltic states. We can't accept a one-elephant world. We want a multi-elephant world, because only if you have a multi-elephant world can you hope for any equilibrium in the world. And therefore, we support, doesn't matter if we do or not, China's rise is entirely its own doing, didn't require any authority from us or from Britain, for that matter, or from the United States. The facts are the facts. China is a country of 1.4 billion people. It is the second biggest economy in the whole world. And by 2025, indisputably, China will be the biggest economy in the world. It is by far and away the most powerful and important country in Asia. There was a poll last week taken, I think, in Singapore by a reputable polling agency, a very big poll, which showed that 93% of people in Asia think that China is the most significant player in their region. 0.5% thought it was India that was the most significant player. 93% thought it was China. So China is an elephant, and people have to go respectfully around an elephant. And what we have done is absolutely disrespectful, insulting, and it's going to cost us a pretty penny. Let's turn to the proximate reason for the immediate crisis. Although, of course, it's never one damn thing. It's one damn thing after another. But the proximate reason is the banning of Huawei from the 5G rollout. Just 6 months after Britain confirmed that China and Huawei could be part of that 5G rollout. France has today announced that China will be part of its 5G rollout. So the solidarity amongst NATO countries on this question is very far from absolute. And the proximate reason for the banning of Huawei was concerns over national security. And we have an obligation to debunk those because they are junk, literally junk. They should be in the junk folder. If Huawei was a threat to our national security in the 5G rollout, A, why did we 6 months ago include it in the rollout? But more pertinently, how come they're still able to participate in 4G and in 3G? That makes no sense whatsoever. If Huawei was a security concern, it's as much of a security concern at 4G as it is at 5G. And how can Huawei be a threat to our national security, and by extension China, be such a threat, when we literally are allowing China to operate our nuclear, underline the word nuclear, power plants? How can it be too dangerous to allow them to provide the platform on which my daughter is currently at this minute watching Peppa Pig or Baby Bus? She alternates between the two. How can China be too dangerous to do that, but not too dangerous to run our nuclear power plants? how can they be not dangerous enough to stop them running our railways or many of the other infrastructural contracts and inward investments from China that have already been made? That just makes no sense. It's an insult to people's intelligence. And if you add the fact that I just gave you, that France today gave the go-ahead to Huawei, is France less concerned with its national security than Britain is concerned about its? Is China more likely to spy on Britain rather than France? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And we have an obligation to talk sense to the British people. But as I said, it's not one thing, it's one thing after another. This insult comes hard on the heels of the insult over Hong Kong, where Britain continues to imagine that it has some post-colonial right to dictate events in what is a part of China. Now, forgive me teaching my grandmother how to suck eggs, but there's a wide audience for this broadcast, some of whom might not know these facts. Britain seized Hong Kong 150 years before the handover to punish China for banning the British opium trade into China, which hooked 90 million Chinese on heroin. Now, with a record like that, you would have thought that in the late 20th century, Britain would have been delighted to get out of Hong Kong to save its embarrassment, to save it from the ongoing shame of having a territory under their colonial control that they obtained in such dishonorable and inglorious ways. But no, not only is it now clear that the royal words of goodwill at the handover in 97 were not sincere, or at least the government that was writing those words was not sincere, but that now, 23 years later, we are still interfering in China's internal affairs. Now, the Workers' Party is very clear on this matter of principle also. In fact, I think it's in our 10-point program, at least implicitly, if not explicitly. We reject the big power interference in other people's internal affairs, because that makes a mockery of national sovereignty. And we believe in national sovereignty. We believe in it for our own country, Great Britain. That's why we fought for Brexit. And that which we believe in for our own country, we cannot not believe in for other countries, including China in this case. China has the absolute right to decide on its internal affairs. But in Hong Kong, both the United States and Britain, and because of our colonial past, even more shamefully Britain, we have continued to spy and bug and burgle and subvert the meaning of one country, two systems. You see, China signed up for one country, two systems. It didn't sign up for two countries, two systems. Hong Kong is not a separate country. It's not a place that can be a playground for international espionage and subversion. It's not a place that can be a plaything a proxy, a cat's paw in the great game of international intrigue and so on. But that's what we have done. We're demanding democracy in Hong Kong when for 150 years we ruled it without a scintilla of democracy. Not a scintilla. No democratic rights of any kind existed in Hong Kong when Britain ruled it. And they weren't so big on human rights either. As you've heard me say, I think before, the rubber bullet was not invented for use in Ireland. It was invented for use in Hong Kong. It was literally invented by us. The rubber-covered lead bullet was invented by us in Hong Kong. Volleys of which were to be fired into any Hong Kong Chinese who demanded political rights from the British colonial administrators there. And of course, the British rule in Hong Kong, ingloriously begun, has continued now into a period of extremely ill-judged interference in Hong Kong's affairs. The greatest interference of which is the completely cockamamie offer to give 3 million Hong Kong Chinese the right to come and live in Britain. This after a Brexit campaign in which mass immigration and the pressures that that brings into the British labour force, into wages and conditions, into the housing markets, into the waiting lists for school places and doctor's appointments and dentist's appointments and so on. We're sending the message to the European Union: no more free movement of cheap labour from Europe, but please send 3 million Chinese immigrants to Britain. They'll be express tracked into Britain without visas, with an automatic path to citizenship. Now, I don't know if the Conservative voting base or their new bastions on the Red Wall and behind are entirely ready for 3 million Chinese immigrants coming here. I don't know where they're going to live. I don't know where they're going to work. I don't know where they're going to find places for their children in the schools, how they're going to get a doctor's or a dentist's appointment. I don't know any of that. And I don't think the British people know. This is a studied insult to China. These people are Chinese citizens. And you just opened your door and told them you want to leave their own country and come and live in ours. So that's another reason why, as a Workers' Party, we are completely opposed to the path of confrontation with China. But the third reason is potentially a deadly one. Not content with interfering in China's internal affairs from afar, not content with insulting China over Huawei, we have actually dispatched a gunboat up the Yangtze. Not up the Yangtze, of course, because it would be sunk before it got to the mouth of the river, just as the last British ship we sent up the Yangtze was sunk as long ago as 1949 in the infamous Yangtze incident, which caused a lot of trouble. Harry Pollitt was cruelly beaten by some Jolly Jack tars in Portsmouth as he unwisely addressed a public meeting on the night of the Yangtze incident. The Communist Party leaders in London were put on trial in Moscow secretly for failing to protect Pollitt and sending him into such a foolhardy meeting. It was a very big deal in 1949. But of course, China has come a long way militarily from 1949. And so has Britain, but in the opposite direction. But we have sent our only aircraft carrier to what is strangely described as China's maritime perimeter, a perimeter that is openly denounced and denied by the United States of America, which rejects China's claimed maritime perimeter. So exactly which maritime perimeter are we sending our sailors and our prime asset to? Are we going to the Chinese maritime perimeter as delineated by China or as delineated by Donald Trump? Because if it's the latter, there is a very real risk of trouble, very serious trouble. And I would genuinely hate to see a vessel named after Her Majesty in her twilight years be sunk by the Chinese Navy by straying beyond what the Chinese regard as their maritime perimeter. Not only would that be a national humiliation for us, not only would it be a national humiliation for the Queen, it could very well lead to the deaths of our brave sailors on board it. And I don't want to see that. The Workers' Party doesn't want to see that. We want to protect our servicemen and women, not send them over and over again into harm's way to please an American president, least of all this American president, because I should have made the point earlier. We are doing all of this as some kind of weird kowtow to the most controversial American president in all history, who might very well be out of office before the ink on the Huawei ban is even dry. So the war games in the South China Sea, the clue being in the name, that the United States is heavily involved in, and now we are going to join, are perilous indeed. Not just for the immediate belligerents or potential belligerents, but for the peace of the world. Because what happens if an accident or a rogue commander or a stray shell brings about a shooting war in the South China Sea? What next? Where does the shooting stop? Wars are very much easier to get into than they are to get out of, as to our cost in this century alone, we know only too well. So we stand with China for these reasons, not because we are slaves to China, but because we serve the British. Our interests are the British people, the British working class. Our interests are a world of equilibrium. Our interests are a world in which we can trade freely with all, not levying sanctions against countries by the dozen. Shall I tell you, that the United States is currently maintaining sanctions against 39 countries in the world? 2 billion people in the world are under US sanction. How do they even keep track of it? I have no idea. A quarter of the world's population is currently under sanction by the United States of America. And none of it is about anything real. Venezuela is no threat to the United States of America. Neither is Iran. Russia and China are not a threat to British national security. They're not sending their aircraft carriers to our maritime frontiers. They're not interfering in our internal affairs. They're not offering citizenship to 3 million of our people. They're not engaging in a trade war with us. It's us that is engaging in a trade war with them as we look over the precipice of the post-COVID, whenever post-COVID is economic disaster on which, the edge of which, Britain currently stands with a gigantic fall in our GDP, a gigantic rise in our unemployment, and quantitative easing going like Billy-O, with the presses in the Bank of England never still. This is not the right time to be making enemies. This is the time to be bringing stones together. This is the time to be making friends, not making enemies. This is not a time for war. This is a time for making war on the economic problems that we have at home. That's my view. That's the Workers' Party view. And we stand by it. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you very much, George. Excellent introduction there. Right, we've got plenty of questions and contributions coming in. And I'm going to go to Fran first.
Evening all.
Evening.
I just wanted to highlight first, I've got a t-shirt that says Hong Kong is China's. That's what it says. You might have seen me wear it a few weeks. That's what it says. Yeah, I just wanted to add a few bits. First, I think the Huawei stuff is absolute virtue signaling from our government. I think they're doing it to keep America happy while not really doing anything of any substance, really, because the Tories love taking the China money. With the Uyghur thing, now I've got friends in China. My partner's Chinese. She was telling me today that people in China on the internet have posted the BBC video, and the response from Chinese netizens is nothing but laughter at the UK, and you know, they're just roasting us for the state of that interview. It's being pushed here in the West as like fact. It's being laughed at in China. So there we go. We're the laughing stock of the world again. There are no millions of Uyghurs being genocided in Xinjiang. There are many documentaries out there that you can go and watch. China Global Television Network on YouTube has a good series on the terrorism that has been going on in Xinjiang. America themselves, sorry, I just dropped something there. America themselves have had Uyghurs in Guantanamo Bay, Uyghurs that they've caught in Iraq or Syria fighting for ISIS, and have been tortured by Americans in Guantanamo Bay. That was about 15 years ago. The terrorist attacks in Xinjiang have been going on since about 2010. They've kind of stopped now, but there's a separatist movement called the East Turkmenistan something, I can't remember the end, but IMT I think it is. Our country deems them as terrorists, and so does the United States. They have committed terrorist attacks many terrorist attacks in Xinjiang. They have butchered people in train stations with knives. They have blown people up in markets. They've driven cars into people. And they've even killed people in Tiananmen Square. In a couple of years ago, they drove a car up to where the portrait of Chairman Mao is, just running people over, and then the car blew up. These people have killed actual people in Tiananmen Square, which has not been really reported here. I don't know if anybody really knows about that, but you can find out about that for yourself. And yeah, basically, I was going to make the same point that you made, but there's a sentence about Hong Kong that I've heard before, and that's that Britain stole Hong Kong at the end of the barrel of a gun to deal drugs. Hong Kong is China's. And people like Mike Pompeo need to keep their fat Yankee noses out of other countries' internal affairs. And that's me for tonight.
Look, the Uyghur situation is a big one in my opening address, because it's not really Britain's business how China deals with its Islamist challenge any more than it is China's business how we deal with ours. If China were interfering in our crackdown on ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other Islamist terrorist groups here in our own country, we would rightly be offended. The Chinese government may or may not be handling the challenge of this Islamist threat in Xinjiang in the best way. But that's a matter for them, not a matter for us. The United States may or may not be dealing with the Islamist terrorist threat well or badly. But China doesn't interfere in how they are handling their own internal threat from Islamist terrorism. As you rightly said, there are Uyghur extremists fighting in Syria right now. They're not shy. They put themselves on the internet all the time. There's a worldwide distribution of these so-called East Turkmenistan militants around all of the theaters of international conflict. They're in Libya, they're in Iraq, they are in Syria, they have been in Afghanistan in significant numbers, fighting alongside other Islamist fanatics from all over the world, including from our own country. The threat of Islamist fanaticism is a worldwide threat. All the countries in the world should be cooperating to defeat that terrorist threat, whatever other political differences they have. We are all threatened by Islamist terrorism. And it would have been far better if the British and American governments had sincerely joined with the Chinese and Russian governments, at least to defeat ISIS, at least to wipe out Al-Qaeda. But the opposite has been happening, as you very well know, Fran. The Islamist fanatics are supported by the United States in particular, but also by Britain, a fact which emerges in the government or the Parliament's own Russia report today. I've written about it in my column for RT, should be online now. They pick out the biggest disappointment of 2018 being the Russian-backed victory over these Islamist terrorists in Syria. You couldn't make it up. The Chinese government is at war in Xinjiang, not with Muslims, but with Islamic terrorists. The threat of Islamist terrorism. Now, as I say, whether they are following policies which genuinely will reduce the threat of these Islamist terrorists? I don't know. But it's their business and not our business. It's the very definition of an internal affair, how a country deals with a scourge which afflicts all countries with the same kind of people carrying out these terror attacks on London Bridge, on the Manchester Arena, all the places that we have suffered from people driving cars like the one in Tiananmen Square, using them as suicide weapons, to explosions without number, shootings and knifings, the same kind of knifings that we've had. They have suffered in China, in Xinjiang, with people running amok in railway stations, with giant meat cleavers. Now, I think we should join with China and Russia to extirpate this Islamist fanatic trend. But my last point on this is a painful one to cite. The people who are crying crocodile tears for the Muslims of Xinjiang are the same people who have been responsible for the massacre of millions of other Muslims elsewhere in the world. Are we really asked to believe that Mike Pompeo cares about Muslims because he doesn't care about them anywhere else? Is it only Chinese Muslims that he loves? But he hates the Muslims elsewhere that he's making war on, imposing sanctions on, threatening war on. What is it that first attracted Mike Pompeo to the Muslims of China? Was it their dress, their style of praying, their diet, their culture? What was it? We know what it was. Their concern for the Muslims in China is entirely fake. It is utterly confected and stands in total contradiction to their attitude to Muslims elsewhere. Thanks, Fran.
Thanks very much, George. I'm going to come to Wayne next. You there, Wayne?
Hello, buddy. How's it going?
Hi, Wayne.
What was my question? My question was about now that we're going to have this trade war with China, this difficult circumstance, is that going to force us to have industry brought back to our shores? Basically, is that going to force us back in that situation?
Is that it, Wayne?
I think that was a short one there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a good one, and I'm glad that you raised it. I touched on this on the Mother of All talk shows last Sunday night. I am against the export of capital to China by British companies. I'm against it. The United States flight of capital to China beggared the American working class in the interests of making extra profits for the Western capitalist companies that relocated to China. Now, you can't blame China for that. You have to blame the Western companies for that. They have deserted our own people, their own employees, their own country that built them into whatever size of enterprise they are. They stole the lunch, to coin a phrase, of the working class in Britain and in the United States for the sake of themselves dining even more lavishly on the extra profits made out of cheaper Chinese labor. So I'm in favor of these companies coming back to Britain. I'm against these absurdly long supply chains which we discovered at the time of the beginning of the lockdown, and the extreme shortages, even of toilet paper. Can't we make toilet paper in Britain? If we can't, then we need a government that will ensure that we can. Why should we be dependent on toilet paper coming all the way from China on a slow boat? That's absurd and ridiculous. Why do we need to depend on China for so much of our medical supplies? Can't we make our own medical supplies? That's the meaning of Brexit, you see, for us. We want to rebuild Britain as an industrial power in itself, not dependent on the manufacturers of other countries, whether they're China or whether they're Cambodia or Bhutan or any of the other low-cost manufacturing centers that have developed over this last period of capitalist globalization. The Workers' Party is against globalization. We believe in localization. We believe in a British steel industry, not one that's dependent on Chinese steel. We believe in a British car industry. We believe in a British pharmaceuticals industry. We're a British party. We're not in favor of capital being exported without let or hindrance for the extreme profit of the companies and the economic damage being done here in our own countries. And Britain is one of those, America much more. The reason why the American working class, the blue-collar worker, has been devastated over the period since the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is because American companies fled to Mexico or to China or Vietnam or Cambodia, anywhere except America. And that's what led to the industrial desertification and the Rust Belt, which gave rise to Trump in the first place. All these things are interconnected. So thanks for raising that, Wayne.
Thanks, George. I think it's important that we recognise that there's this tendency within certain sections of our press here in Britain to paint this kind of relationship between the Western countries and China, this economic relationship, as some sort of nefarious kind of clever trick scheme of the Chinese, that managed to sort of tempt all this capital into their country. And you often sort of find interviews or articles by people from the business world lamenting, like this kind of we've had one pulled on us sort of thing, but this sort of situation that's represented by China's reform opening up policy, represents China's position going back to the end of the 1980s, where it had to make some of these reforms from the point of view of its leadership to try and aid its development. The thing that our kind of ruling class, Western business and capitalism, is annoyed about is obviously that they expected that this reform and opening up would lead very quickly to the complete breaking down and destruction of China's social system. So I think we've always got to bear in mind that this is often presented to us as if it was some ploy or trick. And while we can recognise that China has indeed got some considerable gain from this relationship, it's also one that has caused plenty of difficulties for China in the course of its development. So, we should always be mindful of this sort of balance of the views about this.
Well, yes, Rob. Let me, if I may, respond to that point, because I don't want to give the impression that China is only a bargain basement for cheap goods, because, of course, Huawei is the most advanced telecom company in the whole world, and is rightly proud of it. And incidentally, 70% of the company is owned by the workforce. That's another reason why some people don't like it. It's the John Lewis of the Chinese telecom market. 70% of the company is owned by the people who work there. And we have committed an act of national self-harm by excluding Huawei from 5G development, because Huawei is already well into the development of 6G. In fact, if needed, Huawei could introduce 6G right now, and yet we've banned them, but only in 2027, when of course 5G will be obsolete. And Huawei will be on to 6G, 7G, 8G if there's such a thing. So the reason the French are keeping Huawei on, because they don't want to harm their internet development, their telecoms, high-tech development. So it's not a zero-sum game. China is using its surplus not just to lift its own people in gigantic numbers out of poverty, but to invest in other countries in Africa, but also in Britain. That's why it's building our nuclear power plants. It's why it's running some of our railways. And the best way forward is to have amicable relations with China and a balance in trade, investment, and purchasing issues. And that's precisely what we've now thrown out. Because in case I didn't spell it out clearly enough, China has promised that there will be a very severe retaliation against British companies, against the British economy, for the humiliation of Huawei. And we're not in a position to afford that. We need, as I say, we need to develop better economic ties with the rest of the world, not prejudice the ones we already had.
Thanks, George. I'm going to come to Nadia next, if you're able to speak, Nadia.
Hi, all.
Hello, Nadia.
Hi. I was just, I wanted to comment on something you said and what Fran said about the Uyghurs. This was the main thing, the main thought I had when it came to this situation with China and Hong Kong and the propaganda that we've been seeing in the UK over the supposed treatment of the Uyghurs. Now, we don't know what's going on. That's number one. And number two, as you correctly said, it's not our business. But number three, what I've researched is that a lot of the Uyghurs, 5,000, found themselves in Syria and Iraq, beheading Shias and Christians in Syria and Iraq. And this problem they found in China as well. It was related to the Uyghurs that a lot of them had fundamentalist Islamic views. So there is something there that obviously the Chinese government wanted to sort out. And all of this hypocrisy in not only the BBC, but in mainstream media as a whole, I just find it, I'm so quite angry about it, because I myself, I'm half Iraqi and my father's Shia. And when I see the hypocrisy over the years, all the wars in the Middle East, and all the interventions and all the payments to the rebels and to the Al Qaeda from the West, and I just think, yeah, they're not the right type of Muslim, but the other ones are. Yeah, okay. I find it complete hypocrisy. And it makes me so angry because the Middle East, you know, Syria was once a bastion for the Middle East. Iraq was too. And what's become of them now, the people, what they're going through, what they're suffering under. You know, the slave markets in Libya now. It makes me so angry. And for me as well, when I see this, I just think, you don't know what you're doing, but you're shooting yourself in the foot. I don't know if people have been traveling around the world lately, but we're not exactly loved anymore. We're not exactly thought highly of. You know, we're just seen as some warmongers that just tally along behind the US. It's so frustrating. It's really ruined the view of our people around the world.
Yes, and we're deeply concerned about that because that prejudices the safety of our people at home and abroad. Our soft power, which was once considerable, is damaged by it, and we want our country to be admired. We want our country to be respected around the world. And that's why we stand for an independent foreign policy, for an independent Britain. And that's what we will fight for. But just to make this point, Nadia, I know that you know this anyway, but for the others, these fanatics, the ISIS and Al Qaeda brigades, they don't just behead Christians and Shiites. They behead the wrong type of Sunnis also. They murder anyone, whether Sunni, Shia, Christian, or atheist, who is other than of their own tiny worldview formed in the crucible of Saudi Arabian Wahhabism and Salafism and general takfiriism, the arrogating to themselves the right to decide who can be murdered, beheaded, maimed, even eaten. Because you won't have forgotten the Syrian soldier's heart being eaten on camera by one of these people. He turned out to be a moderate rebel, by the way. He wasn't even in ISIS or Al Qaeda. He moderately ate the heart on camera of a Syrian soldier that he had captured. And the Uyghurs are part and parcel of this. Not the millions of Uyghur citizens, of course, whose lives have been radically transformed by China's economic development, disproportionately transformed, lifted out of poverty even more dramatically than the Han Chinese population. There's a policy of positive discrimination towards the minority communities in China. For example, when China had a one-child policy, the minority families were allowed 2 children. Now that China has a 2-child policy, minority families are allowed 3 children, and so on. And the Uyghur population overwhelmingly rejects these terrorist extremists. But there are thousands of Uyghur terrorist extremists, and China has a right to fight them, just as we fight them. And it would be better if we cooperated so that we could all fight them, instead of some of us supporting them there but not here, and so on. Thanks, Nadia.
Thanks, George and Nadia. I'm going to come to Seb next. You there, Seb?
Hi, George. Hope all is well. Just on the Huawei issue,
All good.
I think that whatever one's opinion on China, I think it makes the government look extremely weak, because it was the same government that insisted that Huawei were the best people for the job, to have the technology, And they dismissed all the criticism from people from within the UK about Huawei. And now, suddenly, the second the Americans come along and say we're not keen on you using Huawei, then they immediately, go along with that. And it seems that in this special relationship we supposedly have with the Americans, it's used as usual.
I'm not getting great volume, Seb, but I've definitely got your point, and it's a very good one. This is not about whether you love China or don't love it. This is about British interests, and Britain has acted as a patsy for the United States in this Huawei affair in a way that France has not. France rejected the bullying of Pompeo and Trump, and Britain bowed to it. And that's very bad for us. It's bad for our national sense of ourselves, and it's bad for our economy. As you rightly say, we gave Huawei the job, despite a full court press from the United States on the bogus security arguments. We rejected them. Just 6 months ago, we rejected them. And now we have succumbed. And much to the embarrassment of the Prime Minister, Donald Trump then boasted that it was his doing. He boasted at the press conference the day after the Huawei announcement that he had got Boris Johnson to do this. Whereas the French government are now basking in their people's admiration that they told Donald Trump to go and get stuffed, that they would do what was in the French national interest. It's just like the Nord Stream 2. Rob, if you permit me to digress for just one moment. Trump and Pompeo tried to bully Germany and Denmark into cancelling the Nord Stream 2, by which Russian gas will keep the home fires burning throughout Europe at a very advantageous cost compared to its rival, American shale oil. And Germany and Denmark, surprisingly in the latter case, said no, we're going to follow our national interest. And that's all we want in Britain, a government that will follow our national interest. We're not asking them to love anybody else. They might not, but to do what is right for us. And in the Huawei affair, I'm afraid the government very definitely has not done what's right for us.
Thanks, George. Yeah, that's a great point there, and what you've illuminated there in that kind of relationship and the situation. I'd just like to come back on a point that Nadia made there about the behaviour of Britain's ruling class and their actions that in this way leading to a drop in the kind of the prestige and the way that people view Britain and British people around the world. And I think that that's something that's tied up with why we're here in the Workers' Party itself, because I believe that this is a situation that it can't really be fixed until Britain's destiny is taken out of the hands of a tiny parasitic clique of globe-trotting capitalists and in the hands of its wonderful people, its workers. And that's what ultimately we'd want to work towards. And that's where Britain and British people will have a chance to actually stand tall and meet and work with other countries around the world in a fraternal, cooperative way that will actually be due respect. So
exactly so. And if you think about it, Rob, although there were foreign policy mistakes and bigger than mistakes in Suez, in Aden, and in Kenya and so on. But for a good 25 years after the war and our role in the defeat of fascism, and Britain had a very high level of soft power in the world, a high reputation in the world, except in the places that we were continuing to try and rule. But the cultural and soft power reach of Britain was, for a good quarter of a century after the war, still at a very high level. But we have, over the last 40 years, thrown so much away of our international reputation. And this has taken place in tandem with the severe fall in the credibility of our own national institutions. And these two things are not unrelated. Our political class, our journalists, our BBC, all the things that we were once admired for are now in a state of decay. And we have to renovate them. We need, in this Brexit era, a new Britain to emerge, one that can rebuild the international reputation of the country. And I believe that we can do it. I believe this great country has great people that can make great things, do great things, and important language in the world. We have great cultural heritage that we offer to the world. We can do it, but only when there's a serious change in direction by our political class.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I agree. I'm going to come to Alexandros. You there, Alexandros? No, I'm not getting... Okay. Let's come to Christina.
Hopefully Alexandros will come after me. What a fantastic conversation we are having. Can I remind you something what happened during the COVID pandemic with Italy and how Italy was thanking China for sending PPE to them, whereas Germany only sends, orders to pay back the debt like it does to Greece. And now Germany wants to work with China because China has a plan. And it's not our role to praise China, but you cannot but see that they are alleviating people from poverty. And what's happening here? What's happening? What's our government doing to us? So do we want to become a poodle again to America and be driven again to war? Or we want to say, stop, you're trying to distract from your responsibility for the hellish situation you have thrown us in during this pandemic and before the pandemic. You want to distract us from seeing that you're not giving a pay rise to the nurses. You want us to see that you're not responsible for the people who are being furloughed and who cannot pay rent. And what they do for everyone who is above 30, they have seen it again and again. Every time that they don't want to be accountable for this hell, they blame an external enemy that's somewhere in Russia, somewhere in China. But they don't allow us like this to see that the enemy is within. And is they're responsible for the situation we are facing. It's the people who are making money out of dodgy contracts for PPE in this country without auditing. The people who are profiting from this situation. And yes, it is up to the Chinese people to decide how they are conducting their own struggle and how they balance the profits of participating in the global capitalist economy with a humanist plan to plan for the generations ahead, to lift people out of poverty, to educate. And you have to be a bigot not to see that China has achieved that, has lifted people out of poverty, has educated its people. Everyone in their own field, I see it in the field of arts, they are excelling. They educate the children from when they are since they are 2 years old. And here, what we do, how do we lift people out of poverty? I'm listening to ads on radio about Asda's initiative and Tesco's initiative about food banks. So there are two things. Either we believe in this unregulated market, or we stand for a socialist world. And we cannot give advice to the Chinese how they're going to become more socialist that we imagine. We have to face the enemy within, the enemy that caused that situation, our own ruling class and our own government first. And we can only show solidarity to China. And for anyone who is bombarding us with lies and tries to distract the working class people, let's remind ourselves, every time that there is a crisis in capitalism, they create a war in order to defend some human rights somewhere else. And they accuse Russia for oppressing the LGBTQ. They accuse China for oppressing the Muslim minority. It's always someone that they want to save, but that's definitely not saving us, right? So let's remember that in conversations we have with people who seem to be swallowing all the lies against China and Russia, whilst concentrating all their efforts on not being fooled by mainstream media about the need to have healthcare and protect ourselves during a pandemic.
Very well said, Christina. Giving away my age, when I was a child, your mother would tell you to eat that up. They're starving in China. That's how old I am. Of course, they weren't actually at that time starving in China, but we knew what she meant. But nobody's starving in China now. 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty, the largest number of people lifted out of poverty in the entire history of humankind. The British universities are so chock full of Chinese students that their withdrawal, which may be coming either by China or by Britain, will cause economic collapse, financial collapse in some even of the most august British universities that have become dependent on vast numbers of Chinese postgraduate students. China's economy has developed to the extent that, as France said today, we need Huawei in order to maintain a competitive technological edge. China is a success story. Do I want to be Chinese? No. Do I want to live in China? No. Do I want Britain to be like China? No. None of that is required. We will sort out our problems and let China sort out its problems. And let's be trading partners if we can't be friends. If we both believe in capitalism, as both countries do, then let's obey the rules of capitalism and let trade be done freely between us. That's all we're saying. You don't have to love China to want not to damage your own economy. And that's what we've done over the Huawei affair and the retaliation that will follow. How many people will lose their jobs now as a result of Chinese retaliation for the Huawei cancellation? It may be very considerable. I don't know what they're going to do. I hope their response is not too damaging for us. But what if it is? Who's going to pay the price for that? Not Boris Johnson, but the workers and their families in the industries where the retaliation bites. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, George. Let's try to go back to Alexandros again now. He says he's got his mic working.
That's it. Can everybody hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, yes, since 2012, I've actually spent the majority of my time in China, and that's the whole length and breadth of China, from the very north, the freezing tundras of northeastern China, to the deserts of Xinjiang, to the tropical rainforests of Yunnan, and the tropical paradise that is Hainan. And I've been, to be honest, quite flabbergasted at the level of development, to the extent when I do return to the United Kingdom, I feel like I'm going to the third world. It just feels, everything feels so tiny, and infrastructure seems outdated, outmoded, not only to the United Kingdom, but actually to the United States as well. And I actually should be, if it wasn't for the coronavirus, I should be back in China right now. And as a vulnerable person, I'm a little bit annoyed with that, but that's a separate argument. Anyhow, what we're here to talk about is China. I think what I've heard today from most of the panelists, I can completely agree with, especially from Fran and George. And I think it's very telling that today, the two countries that is mostly on the news, especially in the last week or so, is Russia and China. In a way, that's almost a compliment, because we've got a very resurgent Russia at the moment, and we've got a China that since 2014, actually, in terms of GDP, PPP, purchasing power, polarity, has been the top economy in the world. And I think that's frightened America. And what I'm very disappointed about now is the British attitude currently, that seems to be, we seem almost to be a poodle to the Americans, especially with Pompeo today coming here. It's quite disappointing me. I did think that, post-Brexit, that we'd be looking for more allies and more trading partners, but it's just disappointing me a lot. I also think that we've got to be very, very wary of the propaganda that's coming to us via the media, and we've got to analyze it as well. I mean, with Xinjiang itself, just look at where the funding is. I think it was in 2001 when the Americans went into Afghanistan shortly after 9/11, when they first went there. They found ETIM training camps there, but they did not designate them immediately as terrorists. They said that they were freedom fighters, although they were working alongside Al-Qaeda. And then you've got also the Dalai Lama in Tibet, with these fast chains there to the American regime, and also the Hong Kong movement recently was also funded by has extensive ties to the American government, and also Falun Gong. So we've got to be very careful, and when we're analysing this, we've got to see where the money source is, and that is very, very telling. I'm just hopefully that, as a British person, and a British person who does do business, that I'm just hoping that this is more gesture politics. And with the Huawei issue, I'm also hoping to look at it from another perspective, that maybe it's Boris Johnson sort of trying to compromise, because he's been heavily lobbied by the likes of Ian Duncan Smith, who, I mean, his rhetoric, he almost wants to start World War III, if you listen to what he says. But there's a way to look at it, that Huawei can stay in the British network until 2027. I'm just wondering, especially with this act not coming in play until December, if they're waiting to see if Trump gets in power or not. But I'm just trying to look at it optimistically, trying at the moment. But I've got the same fears that everybody else.
Andros, these meetings never cease to amaze me. The talent within our ranks, the experience within our ranks, the worldliness of our membership. If you'll forgive me, I didn't know you before, but I now know we've got a member who has traveled so widely in China, is doing business in China, and who knows as much about it as you evidently do. And we are very lucky in the membership that we have got, and you've just proved that again. point that you make, the very shrewd observation that you make about December, might very well be relevant. After all, if Trump loses in November, you won't be able to find anybody who will own up to having been Trump's poodle. The people will be galloping away from their relations with Trump at a very considerable rate. And I hadn't realized that there was a December date here. But as you point out, that could be very significant indeed. In which case, of course, the worst of the retaliation. And I very much hope that we can avoid that. I'm not in any sense encouraging China to retaliate. I hope that its retaliation is a gesture rather than a real one, because our working people will pay the price of the retaliation. And the point that you made about the pace of Chinese development, anyone who's ever been on a Chinese train, for example, and then come back and got on our trains, come from Chinese railways to Southern Rail or Southern Fail, for example. And you see the gigantic difference. China was a third world country, or would have been described one earlier in my lifetime, and yet now they have super development of bridges and roads and trains and all kinds of infrastructure, whilst our infrastructure is decayed and falling down, and in many cases in desperate need of renovation. So we're not in a position to pick economic fights with China. We should be concentrating on our own problems at home. We have serious ones. The COVID is a real crisis. The danger of economic collapse is a real crisis. The danger of Britain breaking up is a real crisis. We have more than enough for a British government to be attending to here at home, rather than interfering in other people's affairs many thousands of miles away. Thanks, Andros, for a great contribution.
Thank you, George and Alexandros. That was great. I'm going to come to Glenn now. You there, Glenn?
Hello, you hear us?
Yes, Glenn, yes.
Hi, I just wanted to say, kind of in reference on some of the points that have been made tonight, kind of with the British government, or really the Western government's attitude to China in relation to both trade and politically, is that there's long been this contradiction that, they'll spread the most vile, vitriolic, demonstrable lies about China. Its internal affairs in terms of, the Uyghur Muslims, for example, or the lies about the one-child policy and so on and so forth, the way it was painted in our media and our education system, which have gone on for years and years, and are this kind of institutionalized attack by the Western governments against socialism. They're part of the wider campaign to demonize socialism. While at the same time, they have this the contradiction being that they'll say all of those things that I'll put across that front, and yet, as was being intimated earlier, they'll openly trade with China, and we rely on China for so much of our manufacturing to be achieved in the likes of clothing or electronics. In the case of Huawei, I mean, when I take part in these calls, it's always on my Huawei tablet or on my Huawei phone, and we relied on them for 3G, for 4G, and we would have been relying on them for 5G. That we trade with them so openly, and yet and rely on them for electronics, clothing, children's toys, kitchen utensils, anything you can think of that's manufactured and sold in the UK is made out in China, and yet they'll be and yet there's this contradiction that they choose to demonize eyes them at every single opportunity on their internal affairs, both on education and both in our education system and in our and in the media. You know, it's which is part of, as I said, this institutionalized attack on socialism and this desire to paint socialism as either unachievable or as the most horrendous, horrific thing imaginable. You know, I often say to my friends and my dad when I talk to him about this subject that the Cold War didn't stop with the fall of the Soviet Union, which, as kind of Rob was touched on earlier, same is with China and the reforms that were passed there in the 1980s and 1990s. The US had a similar hidden hand in the reforms that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, as did the British government to some extent, but alongside the Khrushchevite and Brezhnev regimes. But the Cold War didn't stop with the fall of the USSR. It just moved east, you know, somewhat. And they have tried to screw China over every opportunity, as they do today, hence the Huawei issue. And, you know, I would see it, therefore, as our job as a socialist party, as an openly Socialist Party and the Workers' Party of Britain, to raise awareness, as we are obviously trying to in this meeting and as we do in our party program, about the reality of China, to dispel the myths that are propagated about it at every opportunity and to raise them with people, to bring people a greater awareness of, you know, why these myths exist, why they're propagated, the incentive our government and our media have to do so, because they see the existence of socialism in China and the fact that China is so prosperous and successful as a socialist country as an existential threat to capitalism across the Western world. Because if people knew how successful socialism had proven to be in China as well as the other socialist countries around the world, and they saw the level of development that yourself and Andros were just talking about, George, you know, their unbelievable level of technological advancement, their human rights record, and their the living standard people have across the country, you know, among other things, their level of political engagement and engagement in wider society, they would probably start to call for socialism and demand socialism. And that's the last thing our government and our media want. Because it threatens their wealth, it threatens their privilege, it threatens their influence. So we need to work together to make people realize that China is a socialist country and all the virtues socialism has brought them, the great successes socialism has brought them, to dispel the myths that are propagated about it, precisely to try and prevent socialism being brought into this country. You know, there's a need now more than ever to hold it up as the greatest example of the prosperity that socialism can bring to a country, and to have a hands-off China campaign, as it were, you know, similar to was run in the time of the Russian Civil War, so-called, although again British forces and European forces had a hidden hand to play in that, and were involved in that conflict. And the hands-off Russia campaign, as people will know, was launched in Britain to campaign against our forces being sent off to Russia to tear down the revolution that the Russian people had widely supported and had every right to want, the revolution that had toppled their Tsarist autocracy and had liberated them. You know, our forces were sent in to try and butcher that achievement. And there was opposition to that in Britain from both within the British military, but also the wider population. And we need to launch something similar now, I would argue, as perhaps a two-pronged thing alongside our campaign against separatism. We should more than ever, we should really have, and more than there's been in the past in this country to some degree, we should have a hands-off China movement exposing these lies and standing in solidarity with China for the benefit of our own working people, and to say that this is socialism, this is what socialism can be, and this is what we should have.
Well, look, it's not necessary to accept all of that, and I don't accept all of that. I'm not going to lie to you. The kind of socialism I want to see in Britain does not involve the second highest number of billionaires in the world, in the country. That's not socialism for me. The role of big globalized capitalist companies that exists in China is not what I'm fighting for here in Britain. China is a new thing. It is in part socialist and in part capitalist. The problem for the West is that they're very much better at capitalism than the Western capitalists are. And that's why they are fearful of this new elephant in the room. There's also a bit of Orientalism, by the way, about it. It's one thing being competed with by European capitalism. It's very much harder for them to accept the presence of Asian superpowers emerging as big in the room. There's that to it also. We say hands off China because it's right. It's not necessary for, we say hands off Russia. Russia isn't a socialist country, but we say hands off Russia. We say hands off Syria. Syria is not a socialist country, but we say hands off it because we have no right to put our hands on it. And we have many things to do at home with our hands, rather than be putting them on other people. So the slogan of Hands Off China is the right slogan, whatever you think of the Chinese form of socialism, the socialism with Chinese characteristics of which they speak. You might love that, you might not love it, but that shouldn't affect you in demanding that China's right to national sovereignty and its own road of development, that right is absolute in our worldview. We are against conflict. We want to end the state of permanent conflict which seems now to exist in the world. The enemy is poverty. The real enemy is pestilence. The real enemy is disease. The real enemy is ignorance. These are the enemies we should be fighting, not endlessly looking for one enemy after another around the world to fight. My goodness, since 2001, we have fought Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. We're now virtually at war with China. Our relations with Russia are the worst that they have been since 1920, to which you just referred in the period of the British invasion of Russia and the attempt to regime change the Soviet government in 19, which involved, by the way, hundreds of thousands of British soldiers. Virtually nobody in Britain knows that. It was a massive invasion of Russia by Britain just 100 years ago. Well, now our relations with Russia are back in that tank. And this is just in 20 years. And of course, we have involved ourselves entirely gratuitously in the conflict against Venezuela, by extension in the conflict against Iran, even though as a state we opposed the American withdrawal from the nuclear deal. We have got our shipping assets pointing at Iran in the... How many wars is this country of ours going to fight? I saw a comment from the wonderful Georgie come up on my screen there. It's time to mind our own knitting. Look after our own knitting before criticizing other people's knitting. Let them get on with their knitting while we get on with ours. Rob, thanks very much indeed for that opportunity to speak about the Workers' Party and China. Thank you.
Thanks very much, George. That's a fantastic end to the meeting, I think. To everyone who has participated, thank you very much for putting all of your contributions and questions there in the chat. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone. but there will be more meetings. Thank you to everyone who's been watching online. And as usual, if you're watching online, if you're enjoying the content and the material that we're talking about here in these meetings, please do check out the Workers' Party of Britain online and sign up and get involved. We'll be having our usual members meeting tomorrow night. So all of you who are here in the chat, please do join us there as well. And that's it for this evening. So thanks very much, George. I will end the meeting.
Thank you.